Yeah. Well, and of course, going back to 1024 AD, China was printing money on paper, and of course, we've seen almost every paper currency collapse over history. And I mean, going back to the Byzantine Empire, gold was such an incredible part of keeping that society up, and being able to have such prosperity over, I believe, 1,200 years under gold. And I wanted to ask because, we've practically every renowned economist we've spoken to recently have said that there's a certain collapse coming soon. In Canada, the United States, the euro, of course, we see potentially hyperinflation in Venezuela. Where do you think we're headed in the next few years? And why should people look at gold instead of looking at, worthless paper currency?
Where are we headed? I mean, we've been fairly consistent with this. We think we've had a brief recovery, but the recovery is completely unsustainable, based as it is on 0% interest rates and currency debasement, So we believe we're headed to a recession. We're headed to probably a recession in this year, I would think. And I would think then in 2017, 2018, I think we will have a very severe recession and probably a depression. So the question then is, to us, is more, how severe will it be, and what will the nature of it be in terms of, this ongoing debate? Is it deflation? Is it stagflation? Is it hyperinflation? And I think we don't know, because there's so many variables, and there's a lot of politics comes into this, and there's great games are afoot, and there's a lot of sort of big beasts in the room, whether it be the US, the EU, China, a lot of different players there. So, and the politics can actually influence what happens in terms of whether it's deflation, and also the central banks obviously can influence it. So, but I think our big picture view is roughly deflation in the short term, and we're beginning to see that in stock markets, deflation in assets that have a lot of debt attached to them, and then we think that will quickly morph into inflation, particularly inflation of necessities, so food, water, and finite tangible commodities. So that's sort of our big picture view, but it's going to be different in different countries. But I think roughly, in the larger developing nations that have a lot of debt and have corrupt central banks, with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan basically running the show, in all the major industrialized economies, I think that's pretty much, that's a very simplistic sort of overview, but I think that's roughly the view, our view of how we see things panning out.
Yeah, and many people mention the difference between money and currency. The two are separate, I believe, because of course currency can be literally just based on absolutely nothing but the confidence. And when it comes to things like gold and silver, we've got this preserved value that always kicks back eventually. There's downtimes, of course, but it always kicks back. Now,
Absolutely, yeah.
I wanted to ask you about where are the biggest risks of a bail-in today's world economy? Because we're starting to hear this new concept of a bail-in. It is more of a new concept. A lot of economists don't know what to think about it, because it's kind of the first time it's really been coming up as much as it is in the last 2 years. So what do you think about bail-ins?
Oh, well, I just think they're crazy. And the narrative is, the central banks are saying the reason we're bringing in bail-ins is to prevent deflation and to stimulate growth. But it's quite the opposite what happened. If you actually confiscate deposits and confiscate money from people, you're actually taking money from the savers. You're taking money from stored capital, stored labor, and that's money that will be used for further consumption, for further investment assets, for companies to hire people and to expand. So if you go and confiscate their deposits, and that's what is planned in the bail-in legislation throughout the world. All the leading industrial nations have signed up to it. The US, Canada, European nations, the UK, Japan. So, if you do that, you're taking capital. My biggest concern is actually what we call SMEs, so small and medium enterprises, because they are the backbone of many of our economies, And if you start taking their capital, basically what they're saying is, we will take money above the deposit guarantee, which is roughly $100,000, €100,000, £100,000 in different countries, But that is just an arbitrary round figure. That's just one with 5 digits average, I would think that would very quickly change to maybe 50,000 or 60,000. I think they'll arbitrarily reduce the guarantee size because they know, and this has happened in Ireland, and I know it's happened in the UK with clients, they're actually putting in £99,990 in each bank. And that way they're keeping themselves below. They think they're protecting themselves from this eventuality. But the bankers know this and the governments know this. So they know people are trying to game the system this way. So therefore they'll reduce the government guarantee and people have an even bigger haircut in their deposits, So it's just, it's what it is basically trying to protect the big banks. And the big corporations at the expense of smaller banks and smaller companies and medium enterprises and the savers, basically, and it's absolutely crazy. And we've done a lot of research on it because we think it's one of the biggest risks in the world today, that it's barely covered, it's almost taboo in a lot of the media, and the economists don't talk about it because they know they're on very shaky ground, it's very difficult to argue the merits of bail-ins, even amongst the most Keynesian people. I think a lot of people realize that it could become very problematic and it actually will create systemic risk and possibly runs on banks. It will have the exact opposite effect as what they claim that it will.
Yeah. What I've seen here in Canada, I studied the banks and what they've done here. I see we have different deposit insurance corporations around the world. Here in Canada, we have the CDIC, the US have the FDIC, and so on.
That's right.
What I found out here in Canada, actually, Canada was actually the first one to implement bail-ins into their legislation in 2013. Now, to go forward on that, I looked into the CDIC fund, what was actually there to back up the deposits under 100,000 Canadian dollars. Well, what I found was quite revolutionary because I looked at the numbers and they only have about 0.79% of all deposits under 100,000. Now, a minor little thing happens and, they help you with insuring their deposits from different things. But when you have a major bank like our Royal Bank of Canada, TD Bank, BMO, and so on here in Canada going bankrupt, you're looking at least 5% of deposits under 100,000. So now we're definitely looking at a bail-in from my point of view here in Canada. And I wanted to see your point of what you think about Canada, because Canada was on forefront of this, and that's where me and Josh live. So I want your input on that.
Yeah, well, as you said, Canada signed up, and I think it came in some bill. It was sort of in the small print of some bill in the Canadian Parliament, so it was crept in there like it was a lot of countries, And I think it was a joint thing, as you said, with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, and it was weird because it was the FDIC and actually the Bank of England who had a joint. I think they call it a resolution, So yeah, you're right, and it's funny because Canada it's interesting. People see it almost as a safe haven because of the natural resource wealth, and there is a degree of truth to that, because you do have huge natural resource wealth, and I think this commodity bubble that's burst is impacting Canada in a big way. But I think in time, Canada has much stronger fundamentals than the US. You've less debt, and you have natural resources. But at the same time, you do have issues because your banks do have a lot of debt. They have got involved in some of the shenanigans, shall we say, of Wall Street, and your politicians. Unfortunately, there is a degree of following what happens in Washington. And I suppose the big question is, will Canada blindly follow the US and the US financial and monetary regimes, or will Canada strike out their own independent path? And I think that's hopefully for your sake, because that's ultimately what we all need to do. We need to take back power from these unaccountable institutions, and Iceland is the wonderful model. That's it's the beacon of light and hope that that they are the one country that had their massive issues with their banks, and they dealt with it, and they locked up the bankers, and they devalued their currency, but they maintained their monetary independence, and I think that's a lesson in that for all of us.